Danielle and Jonathan. My chair's up high, I look really tall. With Kemperling Preservation Services for our coffee break. Hi, Catherine, how are you? I don't know if I have you muted or not. Oops.
No, I did.
Okay. So, did you have a question or were you just joining us?
Well, I wanted to talk about restoration of shutters.
Sure.
And hear what you guys have to offer.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I was just, yeah, if you have, well, I was going to talk about like overall shutters and kind of my pet peeves about them, but then, we can definitely talk about the restoration of shutters because it's very similar to, the restoration of doors or more so doors than windows, but it's a similar process.
I guess my question, oops, hold on. Mine has been more to do with louvered shutters.
Oh, louvered shutters are tricky, especially if you're doing paint removal on them.
Exactly.
Yes. Does the Cobra work well with that, or is that still tricky?
Well, both of them actually work well. It has more to do with what scraper you use.
Right, to get in between.
I'm curious to hear if either one of you have any specific experience at what people have used
for scrapers. Yeah, it depends on how tight the louvers are too, doesn't it? And if they're fixed or if they're operable, because if the louvers are operable, that makes it easier.
A little bit.
You don't have to get in between.
I was gonna say it makes it harder.
Well, if they're operable though, you can kind of make it flat and you don't have to try to fit your tool in between you don't have to try and fit your tool in between the slats that aren't moving, because the wood would be less forgiving.
I've resorted to what's that company, Baco?
Yeah.
Makes a really good,
like that really narrow skinny one.
Yeah, it's a carbide tip one.
Yeah.
Right.
But I've went to making my own handles because of how it's designed, like the teardrops and stuff, that
right.
It screws in. So after a while you're pulling on it, eventually that you're pulling on the screw so it comes out. So I started making my own handles, and
you can make that a lesser profile than to fit in.
Yeah. Yep.
So I get the handles, but what about the profile that you cut? Can you sort of draw what it looks like, or is it a state?
You use the teardrop, right?
I use the teardrop, a triangle, and there's a flat one too.
Yeah, he just takes their like they're not, it's not
their blades.
Yeah, their blade, and he puts it on his handle so that it's more narrow.
Okay. So with the teardrop, that's how you go underneath the louver?
If it's off.
Well, there's several times.
Yeah.
If they're pretty tight, like they make a flat wide one.
Uh-huh.
What I've done also is change it so that they make a flat wide one and a flat skinny one. Like I'll use the skinny handle one and put the long wide one in so that just the blade could fit underneath.
So when you say skinny, what length are you talking about?
They make one that's like 1.5 inches, 2 inches, and it goes up to, I think, like 4 inches. That way, when you put it in, you can have it offset so that you don't have anything but the blade underneath it.
Yeah, especially if they're really tight and they're fixed. Because if they're fixed,
you can't move
you have to fit into a really narrow, which I'm sure you're aware. You have to fit into a really narrow space.
Right.
It's a struggle. Like louvered shutters are very labor time consuming, just kind of proposition because of the detail in the work. The raised panel or batten shutters are a lot easier to remove.
Right.
Do you want me
to?
We can show the screen.
We have a lot of the louvered ones here in this town.
Right, in the south.
I moved, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And So one of the things that I'm seeing a lot is that I guess the glue has deteriorated, so the slats are all racking down.
They're not actually mortised in. So they must be newer. That would be my guess. So typically when shutters are built, they're just like doors. They have rails that are the horizontal pieces and then stiles that are the vertical pieces. Typically there are, I don't know if you'd call them mortises, but there's pockets. Yeah, there's pockets that the louvers will sit in.
Okay.
And so then when you put the rails and stiles together and the louvers are in between, those that holds them in place, especially if they're fixed. But if there's fasteners or glue failing, that tells me it's a modern like replacement. Because that wouldn't happen unless the wood had rotted and the whole thing was falling apart.
Well, I think that maybe is the case though.
Yeah.
They stopped painting, and one guy said to me that when the last painter took them down and then screwed them into the side of the house.
Right.
So that they really did rot easily. The water came down.
Oh yeah, definitely. And especially a lot of times people don't put caps on the top either. Like the copper cap, so that because the shutter that's sitting there and you have the stiles have the end grain of the wood right there, so all the water is getting into that end grain unless you cap the top of the shutter.
So it's a metal cap that goes on a wood shutter.
You gotta get those
copper.
are custom made.
Yeah, it's copper. Usually copper. You could use leaded copper or like even roofer's tin. You could use anything, but it's really just bent to fit the top of the shutter,
so that the water flies off instead of
so it can't get into that end grain.
Okay, and so the other thing that I'm seeing is, and maybe this is the same thing, where the joints of the stile and the, what do you call
the rail
thing? The rail have just broken apart. Is that because the glue has deteriorated?
If it's a true mortise and tenon, so that the joinery, so the stile would have the mortise in it and the rail has a tenon. Am I correct? Yeah. Right. Sometimes I know the words. I have to make sure I'm using the right vocabulary so that they fit together. Then that shouldn't happen. So my guess is it was either like a stub tenon or it was just like glued together. It
was either a stub tenon or like you can use a piece of wood and make like a biscuit.
Yeah.
And what happens is the water gets in and absorbs into that piece and expands.
The biscuits are like particle board pretty much. They're a modern solution. They're like oval shaped. And a lot of modern joinery in woodwork is biscuited.
It's either biscuited or they even make like they're like
those little dowels.
It's all the same material. It's like glued up.
Yeah, they're little tiny short dowels that you just
drill two holes and put the glue on it and shove it together.
Rather than using a whole piece of wood as a joinery. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So if it's a mortise and tenon, it'd have to be really soaked and rotten for that to come apart.
It would completely fall apart. So that tells me, without seeing it, that those are more modern shutters.
Mm-hmm.
Because
modern, what are you talking?
I'm talking probably. I mean, they could be 50 or 60 years old, but that's still they were still more modern than if they were built 200 or 200 years ago.
Okay, so they used mortise and tenon until the last 50 years.
They've used mortise and tenon probably till the end of World War II. So World War II, the building really changed. So there wasn't a lot of building during the Depression except for like the public works project. And so after the war ended and all the resources were going towards the war then, after the war ended and all these people were coming back needing houses, we started mass producing houses. In ways that we never did before, where you had one person was just in charge of doing drywall, or one person was just, rather than having a craftsman do the whole thing, you had one person specialized in drywall, and they made product installers. So people just installed windows, installed doors,
roofing,
roofing,
siding.
and the products were made so that you got into a replacement cycle so that they would, you know, continually need to be replaced then.
Mass production.
Right, mass production, and the losing the joinery, because it takes a long time to do the mortise and tenon, even with machinery.
Yeah.
And so to make it faster, they started, you know, using these other methods to join pieces of wood together that doesn't necessarily last as long as, you know, something that was done in a more traditional
we
way.
call it planned obsolescence,
Yeah.
because it's like, I can make a traditional door or shutter, you know, with a through mortise and tenon, a wood peg going through it and everything, and that can last on, like, say, well taken care of, 100+ years.
Okay.
If I do stub tenons or just glue joints and screws,
Right.
heck, I could sell you another set in 10 years if you need them. I mean, come on.
Disposable shutter.
That's another idea behind why they do that
Right.
stuff.
Okay, so I might be able to judge the age of a shutter by how they put those pieces together.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
In tenon, it probably is.
And the other thing, especially if it's rotting easily, that's probably telling you it's second growth wood. At least in the Northeast, we were through our forest by the 20s, by the 1920s, and all of our wood since then has been second growth. And the number 2 white pine that we're getting now, the growth rings are so big, it's
bacteria ridden.
Yeah, it really does. It will rot fast, and once it starts to rot, you can look at it and tell what.
Actually, a few years ago, they downgraded the pine from framing, so it's not as structural anymore. So that tells you also how much they're forcing it to grow and how much crappier it is.
Right. Okay. All right. So that's helpful, because I've talked to somebody who had a bunch of shutters that obviously were water damaged and they started to rack, and I said, you know, I can help you strip those, get the paint off of them. But then he said, yeah, but then I got to figure out how to glue all those back together. And he said,
and
it's a tremendous amount of work.
Right.
So
And
let it rot and then take them down.
Right. Well, and if they're inferior quality, I would almost recommend, depending on where, and we did this actually over the winter. There was a house that we looked at, and we said, well, maybe we can restore the shutters, because that's our typical, you know, first response. And then we looked at them, and they were new shutters. They are relatively new. You know, they were probably 10 years old or so, and they were really rotted. They didn't have caps on it. They were just full of water. And so we did opt to build them new ones in a traditional manner. And I think that would almost be better money, better spent in the case that you were talking about than trying to restore and repair shutters that are more modern. So as you're looking at the joinery, I think that especially if you're dealing with something that was made out of pine or even cedar sometimes, I think that you're fighting a losing battle because the material's inferior.
Well, and it's probably soaked way deeper. It would take a lot to really dry. Okay, that's very helpful. You educated me on several things.
Sometimes it is better to replace with something that is, and we've done that with replacement windows. Like we've replaced replacement windows with traditional windows because that's what the people wanted. Like it just depends on what the ultimate goal is. But I would hate to see somebody spend a lot of money trying to restore something that wasn't worth restoring.
Right. That's half rotted already.
Right.
Especially if it's something that's complicated. They might switch out a louvered shutter for just a flat one, or paneled, or
they're usually raised panel. Usually raised panel, and then there's also the batten, which are really early. Right. They're really Yeah,
Just have
really rustic. Yeah, just the bar or the planks with
Right.
cross pieces.
And those are called
I'm-
batten.
Yeah, those are called batten. And that's the same as like a batten door. Shutter, yeah, board and batten. Shutter and door construction is very similar. It's just different scale.
Okay.
They're built very similarly. My pet peeve right now is in Lancaster City. There's a bunch of flippers that have decided to put shutters on buildings that never had shutters. And they're just putting 2x6 boards and screwing them to the wall. And I'm like, first of all, shutters don't look like that. Second of all, that's gonna rot in like 2 years and you're just leaving people with problems. And it drives me crazy. One morning, we had been away on like on a Saturday and we got home late, so it was dark. And the next morning I'm sitting there having coffee and I look out the window and across the street from us they had put fake shutters on a house. And I said, Jonathan, look at this. And he thought there was an emergency happening. No, it was just shutters getting installed across the street.
Me driving down the street looking at windows all the time. My husband said, "You're going to run into something."
I look up at cornices and then I wonder what people are doing. Well, thank you for coming on and asking your shutter questions.
Well, I didn't know a lot about them, and
Yeah.
I appreciate the detail because one of the things that I've thought about doing is writing a blog about doing shutters.
Mm-hmm.
But they would have to be in darn good shape before it's worthwhile for somebody to strip a louvered shutter.
Right. Yeah, that is a lot of time. But I would recommend somebody to do that themselves rather than paying, somebody to do it because it's a lot of time. Yeah.
Right. Very labor intensive.
It is. And oftentimes we'll see on shutters where they have like louvered shutters that we're restoring where nobody has ever bothered to do the louvers because it was too much. So they might have stripped like the rails and stiles, but the louvers are like glunked really thick.
Rips down. Yeah.
Yes. The other thing I've seen people do, we don't do it, but the other thing I've seen people do with louvers because it's easier, makes life easier, is you still have to scrape it though, is dipping them, but we don't dip just because the whole thing can fall apart.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Because the chemical eats up the glue.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But that's the other, like that's probably a typical approach to them. I don't think it's necessarily the because you still have to scrape it. It doesn't like solve all your problems. Like, so it doesn't solve the problem of having to get in between. It just makes everything loose.
Makes it a little easier.
Yeah.
And then all that gunk is stuck in the wood, and the wood is pretty thin, so it can.
Yeah, and especially if you've left it in there a long time, and the wood it raises the grain. There's a lot of issues with dipping it.
And depending on the chemical, it could also absorb in, and then you might not even be able to paint it again.
Yeah.
Right. Or you paint it, and then the paint fails because all that chemical's coming back out. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good to know. Good to know.
Well, if you have any other shutter questions or need like any resources, let me know. I can send you stuff I have if we're working on your blog post.
Well, I think just what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And I like your advice to, if people are totally loving their louvered shutters, then if you want to restore them, they should do it themselves. Because
right. At least strip the paint. And then if they get to the point, it's like we tell people it's the 80-20 rule of restoration. So 80% of it's semi-skilled work. And 20% highly skilled. So if you're trying to save money, do the stripping and that kind of stuff yourself. Take it to somebody in local that can do the repairs for you. Whether it's, solid wood repairs or epoxy repairs, and then they can give it back to you. You can paint or, take it to a painter. But that's a way to really save a lot of money, because I can tell you in window restoration, the majority of our cost is stripping paint because it's just labor intensive.
Right.
And a lot of people will do one and say, you know what, this is way more work than I want. Here, I'm going to pay you anyway to do it.
Right. So
Because then you don't hear nothing from them, because now all of a sudden they realize how much labor is involved in just stripping paint. So.
And do they actually pay you to strip louvered shutters very
we
often?
have been paid to
Yeah,
do
we've
that.
been paid to do that before.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And just, I know it's hard to do this, but how many hours would it take you to strip a louvered shutter?
Probably 2 days.
Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
going to say.
Yeah, like 16 hours. Yeah.
Wow.
Per shutter.
Yeah, per shutter. Yeah.
Okay.
It's just, it's just and because you want to be careful, you don't want to hurt it.
Yeah, because the more you gouge it and everything, the more you got to fix.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Paint stripping is so labor intensive.
Yeah.
I always imagine, like, when I go in to help, I always imagine that I'm going to be so much faster than I am. I probably would be faster if I did it more often. But I'm usually going to help in a pinch.
Also having the appropriate scrapers.
Yeah, but I do. I mean,
Yeah.
But that makes a big difference too.
Well, that's the other thing I was asking you about is about the profiles, because we do have one scraper. It's called the boomerang, and
Yeah.
it's really good for that because the
Yeah.
tip is really narrow.
Yeah.
And you can get underneath the louver. I guess you'll never get all the way under.
Right.
there.
Yeah, you need something that'll fit in between the wood slots. Like, you could do the part that's like where the overhang is. Probably
Right.
pretty easy with that.
Right.
But then you still need
Right.
something to fit in between.
Yeah, it's a Baco, BAHCO is the ones I use for like the diamonds and teardrops and things. But they also make different size flat ones.
Yeah.
They're pretty
Okay.
thin, but
Yeah.
you can get long ones. But then if you got like a small thin handle that put that on, you could say that extra, like 2 or 3 inches to get in between there. And they're carbide, so you can just resharpen them with a diamond blade instead of throwing them out like they try to tell you to do. And that saves you a ton of money just resharpening the blades.
Okay. A diamond blade or diamond sharpener?
Diamond sharpener for carbide.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right. So if I do decide to write a blog, I think I'll be calling you.
Okay, well, no, definitely do. And I'll send you whatever. I have a couple of different resources in the office that I could send you that's just like overall shutter for background too.
Okay. Great.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Typically, I think. Are you in Virginia?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I think.
We just moved to Colonial, Maryland.
Oh, did you? Okay. Okay. Yeah,
So
I
it's a
think
very-
typically, like, even in Frederick, the first floors are even louvered. Where in the north, like where we are and further north, we're typically paneled on the first floor and then louvered on the second.
Right.
And that was for security and then ventilation.
Right, ventilation. I would think in the South, a lot of them would be louvered.
Yeah,
I mean,
mostly in the South, they're all louvered even first floors.
They need
and the windows are much bigger. The windows are like floor to ceiling, where you don't see that as much.
Special name for those shutters. I can't remember the name of them, but it's still the same structure. It's just different dimensions.
Yeah.
Well, we've got this town here has some buildings like 1772, 1600s, and I have seen a door that's got 2 huge louvers closed. I'd never seen them, and it's like, oh my God, I can't imagine. But it would be for air circulation in the summer.
So you can still have privacy, but allow the air to circulate. That was the whole purpose.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay.
And it's more traditional typically for the louvers to be operable, to be able to open and close them. Am I correct?
That's how the original ones were,
Yeah.
because then if you want, you can adjust the sunlight, the wind,
Yeah.
all that
Right.
stuff.
Yeah.
It's also a lot more work because you got to get the
Decorative.
staples and everything just right to put it
Yeah.
together. We've done those, but that's even more work.
The modern ones that don't move are more cosmetic decoration
Yeah.
than a
Yes.
functional
Yeah.
movable one.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, but I would say like if a house is supposed to have shutters, like and you know, not all houses did have shutters, but and you can tell on the frame if there's evidence of shutters usually, shutter
Right.
hardware.
And
I would say install it so that they are operable, because that would be, you know, historically correct. It drives me crazy when people screw shutters on, and then you could tell even if they were closed, they wouldn't touch,
Well,
or they would.
Yeah,
They're in the wrong shape.
You don't even have to make them operable. Just make them look
Right.
fortunate that
Yeah.
they look,
Yeah.
and that saves a ton of money just installing.
Right.
say that again.
That even if you don't want them to be operable and you just want them to look decorative, make them so that they look operable.
Like, so that they're proportional, so like they're half of each window.
Yeah, like
so that
half
they're
and
closed.
half. Like if you got an arch at the top for an arch window, don't make them square at the top. Make it look arched when they're open. I mean, this is really common sense. Like if you got a big wide window and you put 2 skinny shutters on each side, it's like, come on, really? Who are you trying to fool? It looks stupid. I mean, that's the stuff. At least make it look appropriate.
Is to have real hinges on.
Right.
And here
Yep.
we have a lot of hinges and no shutter, but at least you know at some point.
Right.
they
You know
really
that there were shutters
have-
there. Yeah.
Yeah, because once you screw it to the wall, you got to use tap cons, masonry fasteners,
Or some. Yeah.
and then you're putting wood against concrete,
Or
and they
mason-
or
mason-
whatever they're
yeah.
put that's there. So now you just create water to get behind it, rot it from the back out. And if it is
Right.
touching masonry, the masonry and wood don't mix, so that's causing another chemical reaction that causes it to rot faster. And it's just all because you wanted to save like, you know, $50 in hardware per thing.
Yeah. Shutter hardware is not expensive
Yeah.
in the whole
And
scheme
then
of the
you
world.
make them so that they can lift a little bit even, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They
And yeah, and then there's
operate-
at least air can circulate back behind. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So what else did you want to say other than my question?
I think we covered most of my like, I was going to talk about my shutter pet peeves and like the differences in styles between north and south, and
Yeah, because we were pretty
Yeah.
much described, you know,
yeah.
make sure the shape of the window, the size matches, the height. You know, it's just like the little simple things. It's like having a 3-bay window and then just having 2 shutters made for one on each side, so it doesn't even cover the first 2. I mean, just things like that. It's just silly that.
And what would you?
Oh, I couldn't hear you.
I said if you close those silly things, you have like a quarter of a coverage with the.
Oh
division
yeah,
in one shutter.
that's exactly true. Yeah.
Anybody
Yeah.
that knows anything would say, "God, those aren't real."
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. So, and there are a couple of I mean, you regionally you can find like architectural millwork shops that will make traditional shutters. There's a couple of companies that do make more mass produced shutters that look nice.
They're
But
expensive as-
yeah, but they're for longevity, I think I would go more traditional, or you know, if you have shutters that are in good shape and are original to the house, definitely explore that.
Yeah. But if not, we try to use a lot of Sepilia, mahogany, and white oak, just because of the tightness of each grain and the longevity of it.
What was the first one you said?
Sepilia. They sometimes call it Philippine mahogany too, don't they? Yeah.
Okay.
It's SAP
SEP.
SEPALE, something like that. I don't know. I never won any spelling bees.
It looks an awful lot like mahogany. The difference, the grain is a little different, as it's more straight,
Uh-huh.
and it's like it's harder to drill but easier to sand.
Okay, so it's tight grain, really tight.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a really tight.
we've used it to make natural stained doors, and it looks awesome if you do that with it, just because of the graining. But more importantly, you get the longevity out of it.
Right. Okay. All right, cool. I think I better rewrite these notes because we just
Yeah, if you have any other questions, definitely just let me know, and I'll make sure that I get those answered for you.
okay. Oh, my dog.
Oh, I hear him.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Mhm. Oh no, it's fine. Our Penelope's being really quiet. There must not be any squirrels on the porch.
Right. It's exactly it. You say the word, and there they go.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I've got what I need. You guys
Okay,
are
well,
real
very
helpful.
good. I'm glad you could join us, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
I am. Thank you very much. After taxes, how boring is that?
Oh, I need to take time and do that. I keep finding other things to do.
There's this email from my accountant said, "Hey, you want another?" I think I'm, but it is a dreaded task. There's no doubt
Yes,
about it.
it is. It is. Okay, very good. I'll talk to you later. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.